Oh, it's all the
You're live.
ways.
I'm curious what we
have next on the agenda.
Well, that would probably be the, what you're always talking about. Yeah, no, it's, different funding options, including the ad valorem tax, et cetera. That's, I think, what's being referenced. That was one of a variety of revenue options
I'm just curious
for the state match.
which one that is, if it's not the BPTA study that was already.
I think it was.
I mean, it's, yes. Okay. Today is Friday, February 9th. This is the Senate Transportation Committee. We're going to hear first from Northeast England Rural Community Transportation.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself for the record and let us know what you want to tell us.
Great. So good morning and thank you for taking the time to hear from me today. For the record, my name is Caleb Grant and I'm the Executive Director of Rural Community Transportation, proudly serving, I guess, 3 of the 4 of you in Lamoille, Essex, Orleans, and Caledonia counties. Obviously, Senator Chittenden, if you ever need us to pick you up and see what the hubbub's all about, I'm happy to do it. I want to be mindful of your time. I realize you're very busy, so I'll be very direct and clear with my comments. The things I would like to discuss today are rural community transportation and our efforts to seek efficiency and frugality in our services and encourage you to incentivize these types of initiatives. I'd love to talk about the transformational power of microtransit and our V-Trans pilot in Morrisville area. And lastly, I was hoping to discuss a little bit the economics of transportation in Vermont and specifically the cost shifting and role of regional transportation agencies in largely unaccounted for indirect costs. So RCT, how we're structured. RCT is a little bit different than most of the agencies. We carry no mechanics, we have no bus storage facilities. All of our costs are directly related to the services. So if we have mechanic bills, it's because a bus broke down and we can't give a ride. So a little bit different of a model. We also try to carry that structure and that direct cost model into all of our different efficiencies. So in the past couple of years, we've cut 6 different poor performing routes. These were not easy decisions just in this last year. As you look at the route performance review, there's 2 routes that have been underperforming for 2 to 3 years. We cut those routes, and with those savings, by my projections, we're able to give 30,000 additional on-demand trips. So much appreciation to V-Trans for kind of seeing that incentive and that investment in not just eliminating a service to reduce our part of the pie, but reinvesting that into additional coverage and doing that in a much more cost-efficient way. So really looking at the structure, the vast majority of the rides we give are on demand. We do that largely through volunteer drivers. We have the largest population of volunteer drivers and aggressively recruit through incentives to current employees, through a lot of time working with Legion halls, doing community events, all that type of thing. So on an average day, we get about 800 on-demand requests. So that's through the O&D program, that's through Medicaid, that's through recovery, rider, job access.
Do we change it from O&D?
Yeah, it used to be E&D, but elderly and now is older.
Older adults and persons with disabilities.
So I used to be elderly, but now I'm just older.
Yeah, that sounds better.
What is elderly? Was 60, 65? I don't remember. What's older now?
I don't know.
To qualify.
I don't know if I'm in a position to make that
To qualify for the ride.
60? Oh, 60, all right. Well,
So of the 800 rides we get requested in a day, we are able to provide about 650 of those.
no.
And if we're providing about 650 on-demand rides, anywhere from 500 to 550 of those are done by volunteer drivers. So those are individuals in their personal vehicles going as far as Boston or Philadelphia. And the necessity for that is something I'd like to discuss in a little bit. But in addition to the efficiency sought through our volunteer programs, RCT is also proud to launch a sedan fleet. So utilizing V-Trans funding through federal grants to purchase sedans to provide transportation to individuals where large buses or vans would be inappropriate. We're also downsizing the majority of our fleet So when we purchase vehicles, we purchase minivans, we purchase transit vans, smaller cutaways. It's an efficiency case and many options. We can't share too many rides given the locality of many of our clients. So being able to utilize those smaller vehicles creates a lot of other efficiencies. RCT is also proud to have used ICE or internal combustion engine funding to purchase electric vehicles. So these were not low-no incentives. This was our operational choice to electrify our vehicles in order to accommodate those lower cost structures. So the microtransit pilot in Morrisville in the next couple of weeks will be fully electric. And those vehicles are charged through private partnerships in the Morrisville area, where in their off hours where their employees are not there charging, we actually charge our transit vehicles and are able to implement those in the next day. So these are all strategies that are just operational decisions we make in order to become more efficient and lower our overall cost per ride. So again, thank you to VTrans for kind of recognizing those incentives and those strategies to make sure we're able to do that. And one of the big parts of that is looking at microtransit as a model. So we are one of the pilots in the state in the Morrisville area, and where our pilot is a little bit different is it replaced a shopping route. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about are the both negative and positive externalities of decisions we make in public transportation. Oftentimes when you put a transportation modeling over a community, you find yourself going from population centers, which in our area tend to be trailer parks or apartment buildings, to the cheapest grocery store or Walmart in that case, and then the hospital. And it's a self-perpetuating loop, because if that's where transportation is available, that's where things go. So companies like Dollar General tend to only locate their stores on fixed route public transportation because they have their population fixed within there. So I think about the externalities. The thing that I find pretty incredible about microtransit is you give the agency and the choice back to the individuals. Once we did that, our previous loop went between Price Chopper to Dollar General to some of the population centers, again, assisted living facilities, trailer parks, and that loops continues. Once we gave people choice and agency, the number one stops for our microtransit, which is servicing about 40 to 60 individuals a day, is the big one, the courthouse. Currently, there's not a lot of public transportation options to get to the courthouse. I talked to local judges who have both victims and individuals who are going through the process, and they can't get to their court dates. And so in the Morrisville area where we serve, the court is in Hyde Park. The majority of the population is in Morrisville. So you can imagine the disconnect if an individual, let's say they're a victim of domestic abuse and that abuser takes the vehicle, they can now have difficulties going to advocate. So places like the Lamoille County Restorative Center, a great partner talking about, okay, how can we make transportation to these locations? So the courthouse is a big one. The hair salon is another huge one. Just yesterday, we took a community member, 97 years old, and she hadn't had a haircut in 3 years. We had to kind of make sure we accounted for that in our transportation. So it took about an hour between the loading process and getting her out to the car. We do door-to-door service. So
this is the microtransit, or
this is the microtransit. Yep. And so the beauty of the microtransit is you don't have to be program qualified. So right now, if you call for an on-demand ride, you should call 48 hours out, and you go through a pretty extensive screening process where we ask questions about your eligibility for various programs. And acting as a broker in the transportation area, it's really our job to take the request and find the appropriate funding to move forward, whether that be Medicaid, whether that be O&D, recovery, and then you find yourself with this huge gap in the remainder where a person has a transportation need, but there's not a funding program in order to address that. So that's where programs like Mobility Plus can kind of address that gap area, or areas like microtransit, where you don't have to be pre-qualified for the trip or the destination in order to be given a ride through microtransit. It just has to be within that service area. So the hair salons, the other thing that I think is critically important to think about when it comes to microtransit is the ability for small businesses to compete within the space for individuals who have mobility challenges. So local restaurants, day one of microtransit, I found myself in Black Cat Coffee, a local coffee place, and in walked one of our regular patrons of RCT is a gentleman who was in a traumatic accident and suffered both physical and mental damages. And we transport him about 4 to 5 times a week. These are under O&D or Medicaid, and these are trips that are none of his choice. They're going to get treatments, they're going to counseling, there are any range of things, but he's always in an RCT bus. But that first day, he walked into Black Cat Coffee, and I said, we'll call him Frank for conversation's sake. I said, Frank, did you take microtransit here? He's like, yeah, I've always wanted to check it out. And so this gentleman, for the first time, was able to patron a local business, bring his economic impact to a business that wasn't on our fixed route. So giving the agency to the consumers, to the riders of RCT and microtransit really expands the economic impact.
When did you start the microtransit?
We started in July. And so we replaced the fixed route we put in, and it was a slow growth process. We wanted to make sure that those who were dependent on the fixed route were comfortable utilizing the service.
And how did that go?
It was good. It was a lot of time in community centers. It was a lot of time working with high need clients to make sure we both offer an app. So you pull it up, you can put in, you know, Caleb Grant, and we'll pick you up and drop you off anywhere within that rate or within that region. Or you can call our center just like you would for any other ride, and we can qualify you within that for the micro.
Have you had complaints?
We've not had any complaints other than at this point, demand is extremely high. It becomes a little bit competitive, especially in the mornings. So in the mornings, you have individuals who are going to go to work. We service a lot of families who go to English as second language services at Capstone. We serve daycare, all those types of, when you'd expect a lot of traffic, there's also a lot of demand on the microtransit. And because it's that open service, it does get a little bit competitive for those peak times. So obviously studying the usage patterns and fluctuating with vehicles, all those types of things, it is an extremely scalable model. And the other thing that I think is really compelling about the microtransit model is the software service that we use. It's AI dispatched. So right now, the reason we have
Which one do you use?
we use Spare. So the reason a 48-hour notification is required for Medicaid is because we take those 800 requests in our call center, it goes to our 5 dispatchers, and they have to do the calculations of figuring out how many of those 800 rides we can provide given the number of volunteers, the drive, all that sort of thing. Microtransit is AI dispatch, so it follows traffic patterns, it looks at efficiencies. So if it says, hey, I'm giving Ross McDonald a ride from his house to Hoagie's for lunch, and I can pick up, you know, Senator Ingalls on my way and take him to, you know, this appointment over here, that's an efficiency that the AI, so when you think about both efficiencies and service quality, microtransit holds a great deal of opportunity for agencies. We also have an additional study in Newport where we have a fixed route that, again, goes between Walmart, the hospital, trailer parks, and continues that loop. But how can you expand that, give people agency and choice back to their transportation experience, and how can you spread the economic impact and, you know, address some of those transportation deficiencies in places like ports?
How many vehicles do you have in the microtransit?
Currently, we're running one.
In what vehicle?
We run an electric transit vehicle. So it holds 2 wheelchairs or 3 passengers. So the same transits as you'd see like an Amazon delivery cargo van, but it has the full windows. It has track systems in the inside, so we can fluctuate seating depending on our needs. So we found ourselves serving a lot of families. And so we're going to be expanding into double wide seats and maybe moving down. And so because it's on that track system, we can monitor usage and adopt. So, you know, we're not seeing as many, you know, wheelchairs. We can reduce the number of wheelchairs from 2 to 1. We can still serve as a paratransit mobility, but then we can put in additional seating to address the larger families and do that sort of thing. So the agility and the fluctuation in the model is really promising. Originally, we had modeled it for a minivan, but we found that the demand was such and the efficiencies were there, so we were able to add additional ones.
And that's the vehicle you're charging just at a public charging station in the evening?
We actually charge that at a private company. So we are fortunate to have Concept 2 in the area, and they allow us off their solar panels to charge at their employee stations overnight. So they're not public charging.
And is a donation on their part.
Yep, so we're
Very,
able to
very
account of
generous,
that.
yeah.
It is, yeah, and if you think about the efficiencies of adding electrifying your fleet, I know there's a lot of environmental incentives to do this, but when we approach it, it's purely from a cost perspective. RCT spends anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 a month on gasoline. And so if you can replace even a fraction of that with electrification, VTrans is also funded for us to put solar panels on our roof in an attempt to really close that loop. Can we generate our own electricity that powers our vehicles and really make sure that we're lowering costs? I realize that funding is in a huge demand right now. And so if there's not going to be additional funding, we want to lower costs, because if you gave RCT $10, we would make sure we gave as many rides as we possibly could with that $10. So it's all about reducing costs so we can increase number of rides. So, that is some of the initiatives, and I'm really enthusiastic about microtransit, as I'm sure you can tell.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the economics of transportation in the state, because you have two studies that have been presented to you, and you have a huge demand for funding. And I was hoping to discuss a little bit from RCT's perspective and our experience why these costs continue to go up. And it really comes down to cost shifting and externalities. The case for investing in transportation as a holistic solution to a lot of the complex challenges facing the state of Vermont is really compelling, but only if you can account for those costs. So generally rides are going up, but you also see a significant increase in mileage in the RCT area. And there's some very specific reasons why that is. And again, it comes back to cost shifting. So if I could, I'd like to address it with some of the larger challenges that the state is dealing with right now. So if you think about healthcare, and you think about the medical assisted treatments for substance use, you have a hub and spoke model, but that hub and spoke model really drives and exists through transportation. There's individuals who are getting daily treatments, and we have the opportunity to transport those individuals, but depending on their prescription, they may be transported all the way to Burlington, to Newport, all the way to those hubs. So if you think about a person with a 6-day-a-week prescription, and we have to be transporting them to Burlington, that can be an enormous cost. Just in these past month, we've gone from one MAT treatment shuttle on the weekends to 4 to 6, depending on the prescriptions for that week. So that hub and spoke model is proven to be an excellent model to address the challenges of the state, but that hub and spoke model depends heavily on the ability of individuals to be able to reach those hubs.
Don't you get compensated for those trips?
So that's where it gets a little bit frustrating.
Certainly not.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the question. What's the gap there?
So under our Medicaid contract, we are on a per member per week basis. So whether that member rides 0 times, or whether they ride once a mile down the road, or whether they ride 6 times a week from a place like Johnson, Jenna's Promise, excellent model for addressing the opioid crisis and substance use. But in order for that location to work for that type of treatment, we have to be able to transport that individual to Burlington or Newport 6 times a week.
So you get like a postage stamp kind of rate system. Doesn't matter if it's going next door or across the country, they're the same. You get compensated by member.
I think the postage analogy would only work if we got 42 cents whether we spent a truckload of envelopes or one, right? So some of the other challenges where it comes to that Medicaid model of the per member per week is an example like dialysis, another cost shifting. So the hospitals have chosen to partition dialysis from their services unit. So they privatize the dialysis treatment. That provider then chooses to make a business decision and decreases their service days in the St. Johnsbury area from 5 days to 2 days. Those individuals who are requiring dialysis still have appointments, but those appointments are now in Lancaster, New Hampshire. So whereas there is a hospital making the cost decision to partition dialysis, the dialysis provider is now deciding to move their operations to New Hampshire because they don't have enough nurses. Those are all good business decisions when it comes to healthcare bottom lines, but who's absorbing that cost? It's the
So the
regional providers.
collateral impacts, but I thought the, Viva was relooking at that reimbursement model, recognizing, the cost for some of the, individuals being transported. Maybe, I thought that was something that, because some of these are very expensive, obviously, driving to Boston is not like taking somebody from Lindenville to St. Jay. And then the frequency of the trips, for some of these treatment, programs, like you're saying, doesn't seem like that per member per month captures those outlier, very high cost, high demand situations that you're encountering.
Absolutely, and
So I guess we need to have some more discussion around what's happening with the per member per month and the reimbursement methodology.
Do you have a suggestion for change, or just you're letting
I
us
think
know?
they've been working with Viva. That's my impression, that they've been looking, and Stephanie Barrett would be involved, and she understands the Medicaid transportation piece. So I think that there's a recognition that there are inadequacies in terms of the current structure, for the very kind of situations that you're talking about, because a lot of care, particularly for children in Medicaid, the care, specialized care is actually in the Boston area.
And you're completely right, and we are working with DIVA. Just I believe on Tuesday, the representatives from VPTA were in the healthcare committee, which is, I think, a great transition. But I really want to give some context, because I think I don't want to be in a position to be here every year asking for more funding. That's not a great look, right? But to be able to give an explanation, some context to why it is not decisions by the transportation companies that are driving up the costs. It is external decisions, and it is societal indirect costs that are really shifting over into transportation because we have the fixed income. If you already have predetermined how much you're going to pay the transportation provider, then it makes perfect sense to kind of offload those costs to them. And it happens in the private industry as well. St. Johnsbury had their Walgreens close, and Walgreens as a private company has that right. But their explanation, well, all those people can just go to Lindenville. And I saw that in the newspaper, and I said, okay, that's about 7,000 trips for RCT, and that is no additional income for us as a provider. And you hate to start to monetize the challenges of your community, but one diagnosis of kidney disease can be a $10,000 loss for RCT, because you start thinking, well, we're still getting that $47 per member per week rate. And now here's this additional disease, and we're going to have to go to Lancaster 3-4 times a week. And so not only is that a cost just from a gas and mileage perspective, but you've now pulled a driver who, you know, may be paid, depending on the transportation, a high capacity wheelchair. You're talking about a very specific driver and a very specific vehicle. And now that's out for 4 hours. If there's a complication, we stick with those individuals, and we stay with them. So it's not only in the healthcare industry, but it's also happening in the schools. You know, as schools start to offer educational specialization for high needs cases, it's often RCT that's asked to provide that transportation midday. And so we do cost those rates and do all those calculations, but all those types of decisions impact your regional transportation providers. So it's not internal decisions that are really driving our costs up and mandating that we keep coming back to ask. Other programs like nutritional assistance, you look at the Barton Meal Site following COVID, a lot of these communities chose to stand up senior meal sites, was phenomenal. It was a great opportunity for seniors to both engage in nutritional assistance, but also engage socially. And what that did is it displaced a lot of programs like Meals on Wheels, where the food was brought to the seniors. And so now you're left with this void. So when Barton, on a financial decision, chooses to close a Barton meal or the senior meal site, we're now transporting those individuals to Orleans. So yet another example of the transportation companies absorbing that cost.
Yeah.
I heard you say that it's not a good look if you keep going back every year for asking money. That's all I see around here. So what I will say, and my question to you is, and I should know the answer to this, but in Chittenden County, we have a municipal entity that assesses and sends a bill to our member community municipalities, but that's not everybody. And so we do provide services in communities that we go out hat in hand asking for resources. Do you have monies coming in from the municipalities that are helping support these causes, or is that an avenue you've pursued in order to also align their planning, their development to be public transportation conscious, as that has demanding bus stops, bus pullovers, and so on? What support are you getting from your municipal towns inside of your service area?
And that's a great question. So RCT serves a quarter of the municipalities in the state of Vermont. So we serve about 64 different municipalities, and we go to each one of those and ask for appropriations. Some of those require a yearly collection of signatures. Some of those we do on a cycle of increases. And so the way we approach that is each year I'm given a spreadsheet that shows the number of rides we provided to the community, the amount of total cost that community incurs from a transportation perspective, the amount of money that we've asked for them historically, and whether that's an appropriate space for an increase based off their increased usage. What I've found is that communities that require the most transportation are often the communities that are in the worst position to provide financial positioning. So if you look at a community like Barton, which is recognized as one of the oldest communities in the state from a population perspective, we give 12,000 rides a year from Barton.
Yeah, there's like 5 nursing homes right in the center of Barton. I mean, the older population, I shouldn't call them nursing homes because they're not nursing homes. They're residential care or assisted living or or subsidized living for older folk. And yeah, so
if you look at the tax base, the other calculations we do are what is the cost per member who utilizes transportation, and what is the cost across the general population. And oftentimes the ones with the lowest tax base are then the ones who have the highest usage. So in order to balance that, it becomes pretty synergistic.
So of the times you reach out to the communities, what percentage uptake are you getting, and how much resistance?
100%.
And also 100%. They pay you what you suggest that they should contribute based on the services you're providing.
It is very community dependent. So you look at a place like Elmore.
Well, last I knew when Mary Grant, but maybe with Lamoille it's different, but we had been getting appropriations from all the towns served.
So we do get some form of appropriations from every member town. What that looks like can be very variable depending on the community. So a place like Elmore, we asked for $250. They went to town meeting day and they approved 125. Right? Communities like Morrisville, where they just recently decided that each nonprofit appropriation will be voted on separately. I go, town meeting day is a busy day for me because oftentimes I'm speaking at select board meetings. I just spoke at East Montpelier, who is approving our appropriations. I went and I spoke to them. I talked about the concerns. I talked about the increases. So each town leading into the appropriations vote is sent a letter from RCT that says, this is the number of rides we provided to your community this year. This is the financial contribution we have made, and this is what we are asking of your citizens. So some communities may receive a letter that says, we have given you $250,000 worth of transportation this year for 150 members of your community. We are asking for $5,000. And depending on the dynamics of that individual community, there may be open debate during town meeting day. There may be
yeah. And do you get any money from the businesses? Which seems like it would have been easier on the fixed route than microtransit. But if you're always dropping off people in front of Walmart, you think Walmart would want to help the bus service?
So we do seek sponsorship, which is a different form of appropriation, obviously specific to businesses. It is interesting to see the view, and I think this is an especially relevant conversation when it comes to the healthcare industry. You have both hospitals as well as providers like northern counties where their entire business model is dependent on our ability to transport individuals to. We get calls saying, especially if you look at, adult day services. Adult day services, their entire business model is our ability to get 12 to 24 high needs clients with various forms of mobility challenges, wheelchairs, to their locations. And so those are all covered under O&D. So they actually receive funds from us rather than the other way around.
Okay, but we need to move along. Do you have like a punchline or an ask? You said you're always asking for more money, but I haven't heard you ask for more money yet.
So my ask is that when you review the two studies, to please understand that these are not decisions made within the transportation agency that have increased these costs. This is other industries or private companies that are making decisions that are dependent on transportation to increase those costs. So please be mindful. Our model currently is not sustainable. We are bleeding money, but we are giving every ride we can. And so when VTrans comes to you, when GMT comes to you, and RCT says our costs are up. And so, Senator Kitchell made the point that we are working with DEVA. I don't want to make money on Medicaid transportation.
Right.
I can't lose money on it. So the model, we have pitched a risk corridor where 1% loss or profits would then be addressed and redistributed. That's perfectly fine with me. There is also reimbursement models. The work we do with VTrans is a reimbursement model. We give the ride, we calculate the cost, we send a bill to VTrans, and they compensate us.
That would be ideal for your relationship with DEVA, right?
It would. There's obviously some internal challenges there, but it also leaves a 10 to 20% local match challenge. So as you see needs increasing in areas like RCT, that burden is outpacing the local match, which is why that local match study is so important.
Sounds like the schools.
Can we make a segue comment to get to our next witness?
Yeah, does it actually involve segues?
Oh, they have those now?
I just think the solution is when I get my sewer bill, my stormwater bill, when I get my utility bill, I don't get to negotiate or say I don't want to pay this. I think we should start looking at public transportation as not you asking these communities for an amount of money, but saying we're providing these services that need to be provided. This is the bill to the municipalities. And I think that would be another funding source on top of the registration.
And I forget why the Chittenden Communities entity can do that and others can't. They joined that they created that entity.
Kind of like a wastewater, solid waste
They
district.
created almost like their own.
Right, it's costing a lot of time and administrative time to go out to each of these communities, negotiate.
Well, I want you to know when Danville, we lumped them all together. I made a motion and say, let's just
Yeah.
approve them all.
So why did
So
those
you didn't have to
communities,
come.
Can we do that again? No.
why did they agree to do it? Like, what was the benefit? It seems like each town would want to maintain their sovereignty as every town.
And I don't think Colchester joined yet,
They're
so you
flirting
have.
with it. I think we'll hear about that shortly.
They did join, they're just not voting member.
Yeah.
But they paid
Last year.
Yeah, they paid.
So why do communities why would they join? What's the advantage?
They saw a larger need to meet some of the other transportation demand management, and they also would have a seat and a vote on the board to be able to have a say over it.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Grant, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We're gonna sort of continue the same discussion. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Nick, come on, sure.
Thanks for having me, everybody. For the record, I'm Clayton Clark. I'm the General Manager for Green Mountain Transit. And with us today is Nick Voss. Nick, as our Finance Director, serves as the Chief Financial Officer for GMT. And you may recall that he was here with me last year to go over our finances. And so Caleb touched upon a lot of the challenges with funding transit in our state, and I'm not going to go over the things that he covered. I'm going to primarily be focused on how the non-federal match study would play out in the urban area that GMT operates. And so, as folks may recall, GMT is pretty much two transit agencies that share a same management team, and with GMT Urban and Rural, and I'm going to be focusing on the urban side. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of GMT, and one of the things that's important to consider is that GMT is a Frankenstein monster of transit. Literally, we are built on the carcasses of dead transit agencies that failed financially. And so that history doesn't escape me when I look at the future financial situation that we have, that transit agencies do fail. And I'm concerned about GMT failing if there's not action that's taken to address some of the concerns that are coming up. One of the things that Nick is going to go over in a moment, I'm going to turn him over to talk through some of the more specific financial information, is that urban transit is struggling nationwide. This is not just GMT. Urban here is the only place that operates an urban transit system that is facing existential crises, requiring new ways of thinking for public transit. And so we are part of that mix. One of the things that worries me is that if there is no action on the non-federal match study this session, we're about 4 months away from beginning to plan serious service reductions in Chittenden County. That's because we're going to go over our fiscal cliff in fiscal year 26. We begin planning our fiscal year 26 just like the state does this August. And so that means that we have to come up with a way to stay within our finances. And that's only going to happen if we have service reductions. And I'm not talking about 10 or 20%. I'm talking about greater than that. That makes me feel that the possibility of us having a death spiral is certainly the case, especially when you think that the non-federal match study in some ways painted a much rosier picture than actuality. The non-federal match study assumes that municipalities will continue paying the same amount. I suspect they will not feel that way if we reduce their service. That study also assumes that labor rates will grow up by 3%. That's just not realistic in today's environment. If anyone is familiar with what the Teamsters just negotiated at UPS, it was significantly more than 3%. And I think that they are expecting that, and we're about to enter negotiations with them because all of our contracts end at the end of this year.
Are they represented by the Teamsters?
They are represented by the Teamsters. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. So when you look at cutting service, that means a reduction in ridership. That means fewer federal dollars from our stick factors. That means fewer municipal dollars from our municipality. That means cutting more service. And that's what gets into the spiral that I'm concerned about. I definitely think that, and one of the reasons why I think that it's not alarmist to say that this is potentially existential is that we already have one of our members openly talking about leaving GMT.
So really good.
That's Heinsberg. Heinsberg. We also have another member that, based on their inquiries to us, I suspect is considering the same. And so our municipalities are already considering whether staying in this model where we can assess them is what they want to do.
Previous city manager Sal Burlington was very open to this. So I haven't heard the lead because it's $600,000 a year on the budget. And they question the value. So I validate every concern you're raising, sir.
Yeah. And so the study came out and it talked about a statewide approach, which I fully support. I think that it makes sense for there to be a statewide approach, but we also can't escape that study identified that the vast majority of the gap in the coming years is from our urban transit, because urban transit's very different than rural transit, and that's the gap will be coming earlier. And so I could fully understand the politics of asking people statewide to support public transit in Chittenden County and how that may not go over very well. I do think that even though a statewide solution is necessary, that what we may want to consider is a Chittenden County solution for a Chittenden County problem. And then having either some of the suggestions that came out of the non-federal match study apply only to Chittenden County, or some other methodology that would be able to raise the funds in the community. I think it's critical to me that there not be a disconnect between where the funds are raised and where the service is provided, because that just is, good governance.
Very good.
disturbing news, you know, to hear that, people don't want to pay for the service. And I was just trying to think as, Caleb was talking and now, earlier now, what you're talking about. I was trying to think as a committee of where we heard this in testimony, but there's other outside sources that are affecting your ridership and it might be, policies of cities. And it seems to be that there's, we had an intern in here the other day that the UVM students aren't comfortable riding the bus because of some of the problems that you have with the drugs in the cities.
Yes.
Could you, at some point in time, and not now, could you elaborate on some of that?
I would love to talk about safety because I see that as the biggest barrier to having choice riders. And because people who have other options are not going to choose an option that they don't feel safe on. And we have regular occurrences on our buses and our transit center that, you know, would make a person not feel safe. And I think that is triggered. We get more requests to bring fares back than we get requests to have them continue to be fare free. And almost all of that feedback, people cite safety as the reason why they want to see fares return.
They haven't come back yet. They're coming
They're
back.
coming back March 6th. That's exactly right.
I would think the other thing that municipalities are dealing with, there are two parts that they tax rates. One is the municipal, which is where you are,
Yes.
and then the education tax.
Yes.
And I know that there's always been a tension certainly within municipalities, and I'm sure the prospect of a very double-digit increase in property taxes is influencing some of the focus on how do we skinny down our budget on the municipal side. And that's just another example, whether it's, you know, Rite Aid or Walgreens shutting down. What we have is a very large expenditure on the part that everybody in the town experiences, because even if you rent, property taxes are going to influence what you pay. So that to me is one of those externalities in some ways that is having a collateral impact on the funding that the municipalities and people want to pay. We always have this left and right hand side, I want the service, but I shouldn't have to pay for it. And so we deal with that all the time. But I do think certainly the local decisions around what is spending, and 15 or 18% is a very, you know, relative to all the other systems that are limping along on 3%, 4%, and it's creating a tremendous pressure, and I think influencing voters' perhaps willingness to, you know, agree to funding some of these nonprofit services that they benefit from and take for granted. And transit is one of them, but there are many others as well.
And I agree with all of that, but I think what's amazing, and we're seeing it, I know we've seen it in our area as far as asking towns to support to ambulance service. And then now we're looking at dispatching where they actually have an option of free service. But they're like Newport City, for example, is actually they're grabbing people that were towns that are willing to pay for the service because they think that it's better. It's a better service, and even though it's free, they want to pay for the better service. So I think there is a model. I think there's a model to get there. But again, you're hearing Mr. Clark. You know, you're getting pressures from communities who really who don't want to pay. And that's disturbing.
And I thought we did a special route a few years ago for Heinsberg because what's the major important? Is it Sun Common? It's a solar company there.
Yes.
And we actually did a CMAQ route.
Yes.
Because of the number of employees that were needing to go to a Heinsberg-based employer. So it's kind of interesting evolution around, or maybe there's not a great take-up of the service. I don't know at this point.
I can tell you that particular route is following the trend of all of our commuter and link routes, which is that it's significantly down from its pre-pandemic. And our urban routes have really rebounded pretty well, but our commuter and link routes have not. And one thing I do want to say to defend our municipalities a bit is that because GMT does have the assessment authority, The contributions that the municipalities are contributing are, in the 5% range. They contribute over $3 million a year towards the service. And so it is, the municipal contributions in Chittenden County is much higher than it is at any other, place in the state.
But the voter mentality,
Yes.
that I think will be there at the town meeting this year
Yes,
could be
Right.
worrisome.
Together with the school
Yeah,
yes.
increase in other municipal
yeah.
pressures.
I don't think this is a Chittenden County problem. I think we need public transportation dollars for the whole state. And
Yes.
a lot of people drive into Chittenden County because we got a lot of stuff up there. So even if you live in an area
Yeah,
and have a
Costco,
car, yeah,
right.
you do. It's a great Costco. Bring it that time. Even if you live in a place without public transportation, you're using roads that are served by public transportation. And so supporting public transportation addresses our network and our road wear and all those other problems. So I hear what you just said, but I'm fully in support of looking at solutions that fund all of public transportation throughout the state and not just isolating this in Chittenden County.
Well, I would agree. I think this actually is a larger policy and tax debate in my mind, because we're talking about, historically, it's been a user fee on the people really focused around the automobile. And now that base is eroding, but we still need to maintain the infrastructure, whether you've got one person in the car or you've got 20 in the car, or whether it's because of the transport of goods. So the question is, are we now moving into more of a discussion about societal good and need, as opposed to a system that is user-based in its support? That's what I see as really part of what we're dealing with here. And that is, even if you don't register a car, but you still need to get to services, you need to have goods delivered, you need to have whatever. And so in some ways, that old user-based taxing and support approach, I think we're struggling with it. I think it's antiquated for the world that we're in right now and ultimately going into. So it's been very much around, the individual automobile.
And I don't see it even as a user base so much as that, as we look at the downturn in this economy and listening to Caleb and it being where we're from in a rural area, I'm just thinking, just hearing the story about you being at the coffee shop and one of your riders coming in, I see it as a quality of life. The idea
That's
that
a societal good
Exactly.
benefit that I'm talking about. Yeah.
Right, I see it as, that somebody should have the basic right to get up every day and not have to worry about how they're gonna live their life and how they're gonna proceed and, so I'm in agreement with that.
Listening to Caleb, provided me in my last job, I ran a long-term care facility during the pandemic. And the source of the most strife amongst residents was when the hair salon was going to be back open. And so hearing that making trips to people to get their hair done, I mean, that you have no idea how important that is for people's lives.
And you look at the composition of who's older, and they're women.
Yeah.
Guess men don't care about their hair.
We just put it on.
Or they lose it.
I spend a lot of time on my parents. Can't you tell?
So Nick, Caleb had another comment.
Just off your point, I think an important consideration is that the cost of transportation does not go away if it is not publicly funded. I think one of the deficiencies of of the braided services study is that it showed how much support that transportation gets from the state of Vermont, but it failed to show how other states were addressing those transportation needs. And I think oftentimes it gets shifted to private companies or hospitals who then are required to do their own transportation. So I think the business benefit of the investment of transportation cannot be understated, because that cost does not disappear if you don't fund public transportation. It again gets shifted.
Unless you just don't provide the service.
Right, the public transportation could disappear.
Right. Well, but that person's, there's still the gap between where they live and what they need. So that
other things fall apart. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, we've heard that a lot in this committee about you need transportation to get to work, or that person's just gonna say, I can't work. And then what does the society unpacks that person? No, and so did you say that some other states, if the transportation has fallen off the hospital, just like, well, we have to get our own bus and do it on their own?
I don't know. And that, I think that was something that was missing from the rated services study was it showed how much investment that Vermont has made in public transportation. But it did not recognize that that same $42 million just does not disappear in other states. It gets absorbed by other either social service companies or by different private companies. So the cost of transportation of addressing those gaps doesn't go away, it just gets absorbed by different sectors. So I think recognizing the investment and the savings and the business friendliness of Vermont, because we do invest in public transportation, is an important part of that conversation.
Since you have warned on here to discuss the non-federal match study, I'll just make a general comment on it. I am increasingly in full support of looking at an ad valorem tax to raise additional revenues to directly fund public transportation. It seems like a very progressive way to collect revenues from those that can afford it. And it's jarring, maybe it's too strong a word to me, that in Vermont, if you register a 20-year-old beat up Cavalier, you're paying the same amount as if you're registering a $80,000 Tesla. I think we should look at what other states have done to collect some additional revenues, and I see a direct connection, a nexus, I think is a lovely word around here, between car registration fees and subsidizing public transportation. If you choose to register a car, you're choosing to contribute to congestion and road wear. I think you should be subsidizing public transportation to get more people out of the vehicles.
But what I'm saying is that's a very small base. And in fact, that transportation infrastructure benefits every citizen in the state. So you're relying on a small, well, and on a declining user group. That's my only point is I don't have necessarily a problem with what you're saying, but I do know ad valorem, but that didn't also go in to say the states that have it, do they also have a purchase and use, which New Hampshire does not have. They collect the tax over the 10 years of the thing. So we do a purchase and use. So you can't just look at, what states have it and what else, and do they have a purchase and use? And then that gets into the education fund. A third of it goes there. So my only point is, and we struggle with this all the time in appropriations, and that is, what are those collateral impacts? And if you do this, what will be the impact here? And there's historically, I'm going to take care of my business model, and we see it within state government, and I'll solve my problem by picking your pocket or, putting the gorilla on your back. So I see that what we're struggling with here is how do we, in a broader way, to me, move out from that reliance on the automobile and looking at what and who benefits from our transportation infrastructure, because I think we all do.
Where's the money coming from?
Well, that's going to be the big question. But I'm just saying historically that how we've looked at it and the funding streams, I just think we're going to have to be, reevaluating whether not that they go away, but are they just part of how we address this problem?
At the end of the day, the pie is only so big. You're only gonna have so much money for the people that are paying the taxes, and then, you only have so much. So we can either increase taxes and drive people out of state, or we can find ways to bring people into state so that we can have more tax, or we can cut spending someplace else.
But
that's what you face.
I just see that what the reality is that our current tax and revenue structure and the T fund is a declining, and it's going to continue to decline for all the reasons that we've talked about. And so it forces a discussion in terms of what we want for our transportation infrastructure, including public transit. But I'm also talking about just the maintenance of, our roads and bridges to airports. So I guess I'm just saying we have a a structure that worked pretty well for 50 years, but I'm not sure it's you know, if you look to the future, it's, you can lard on more tax on that group of users, automobile owners. But at some point, I think we're still gonna be having to deal with a very difficult situation, and that is this user-based tax structure and revenue generating structure going to ever continue to erode, and we've really got to relook at it.
Yeah.
I guess that's all I'm trying to say.
Maybe we don't need to be increasing the size of our roads to accommodate traffic, and we can spend less on them and put it towards more public transportation and drive them into that way, but I don't think the public's gonna like that.
Mr. Grant has a point.
I have found in my year and a half of transportation that the best transportation solution is prevention, preventing the need for transportation. And so one thing that I have discussed with VTrans and VPTA is within the budgetary process, calculating the transportation, the costs of transportation impacts on various bills. Because as you address housing, as you address education, as you address all these other sectors, there's a transportation cost associated to that. So a real estate purchase for affordable housing may be the most cost efficient. We'll use St. Johnsbury as an example. The most cost efficient purchase for the homeless shelter was 2 miles outside of St. Johnsbury. That real estate purchase is no longer the most cost efficient purchase if you calculate into that the transportation cost of that.
Well, we've heard from the women's prison and institutions that in Maine, they have a very, won't spend a lot of time on explaining it, but they have a very great prison up there that has zero recidivism in 12 years about the way the model they did. And when we asked them what was the biggest mistake that they made, what was the biggest mistake that you made in this program? And that was, well, we didn't build this prison 2 miles closer to transit.
And I agree, and I think the housing people are really struggling. You know why that site in St. Johnsbury was selected and would be supported by the community? It's because of its location. And so we're trying to deal with infill and what are those, and so that we have greater density and reduce the transportation. And you look at where all our union schools are plugged. Kids can't walk to them. They can't walk to Twinfield.
Right.
They can't walk to Vera Union 32. They were not designed, and all our neighborhood schools years ago, kids could walk. Now so I'm just saying, and the reason I'm thinking of it is because I'm still reading the biography of Robert Moses and his focus on the automobile and the extent to which it destroyed so much of what could be beautiful in New York City. And it was all around promoting the use, and public transit was ignored, and minority populations were ignored, and it was all on the automobile and building those highways. And I think we're making those same decisions around the siting of services. That's the whole thinking behind our smart streets, because we've been building medical complexes that are all on the out, and people can't get to them. Right. They can't walk to the doctor's office. So all of this is coming back, and we're reassessing where we build, where we site, and just like you're saying with the prison. On the other hand, many of these entities to be cited are not necessarily embraced enthusiastically by the various communities, including the housing and for whom, or treatment programs or whatever. So it forces us, and I go back, because John Muir said everything is hitched to everything else, and that's really what we're talking about here.
Wayne, did you have something?
I did, and so,
Move on.
I'm sorry, I'm just, I'm just saying there's a whole lot of discussion here, but we are kind of experiencing the legacy and the impact of decisions and planning and stuff that were made maybe a decade or 2 decades ago.
Blame
What?
that, blame that, blame that.
Blame them?
One of the things we heard from Caleb is that we have some of our service organizations and state service that's provided is built upon transit being what brings folks there. And you look at Dale, which is the organization that I came from in the state government, has a $600 million a year annual budget. It supports the adult day programs that Caleb is delivering people to. And how much is Dale contributing towards transportation? Nothing. You know, and so that to me, and I understand that human services is another committee and that, you know, you're not gonna be able to, independently.
Well, if they're Medicaid, they get.
If they're Medicaid, but Medicaid really is, you know, one portion of it. And I think that we need to have a system that recognizes that and one of the reasons why I was excited coming out of human services into transit was transit, getting people to where they needed services was always a problem in every job that I had. And so I think that human services organizations within the state need to, contribute to have the transit to bring their customers where they need to be. One bureaucrat's opinion.
No? Well, when you figure it out, let us know.
Roger that. That's
But
Bill.
I think we knew, I mean, we understand the issue, but it's good to give
Oh, we
reminders.
worked right through our break.
Oh,
Yeah, well, we probably don't need we don't have anything else on the agenda other than hearing from Dakota. So we don't need all that time, so if Dakota doesn't mind, we can take a break.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming in.